I'm just letting you know that we are moving out, and you're figuring out how. Or I'm moving out.
You were mad that you were never a part of the family, and mom finally accepts you and you want to move on? Are you crazy? Like, moving out of the house is not an option.
I can't be miserable all day long, every day.
Is divorce in the cards?
Yeah, I am at my breaking point.
No.
She was spotted alone at the airport, makeup smudged, no luggage in sight, sunglasses on indoors to hide the tears that had clearly been falling for hours. And the biggest shock wasn't that Jenny was leaving India. It was that Sumit wasn't with her. Not even close. No goodbye, no chase, not even a statement. Just silence from the man she gave up her entire life for. The photos leaked fast, and the internet exploded faster. Everyone was asking the same thing. What happened inside that house to make Jenny finally walk away after 10 years of emotional chaos, public shame, secret marriages, fake promises, and nonstop battles with his family? Because if this woman, who waited through visa limbo, humiliation, and being called a curse, if she was done, then something massive must have snapped. Welcome to TLC Drama Live. I'm Sabrina, and today, we're not sugarcoating anything. Subscribe right now and drop your thoughts in the comments. Because this isn't your average marriage meltdown. This is a slow, emotional fire that burned until the final match was lit in front of millions. There's something bone deep about betrayal that isn't loud. It doesn't always come with yelling or violence or cameras catching the moment. Sometimes it shows up in your body when you realize you're not tired, you're done. And that's exactly the energy Jenny carried when she stepped into that airport without saying a word to the man who once swore he'd choose her over everything. Because guess what? He didn't. He chose comfort. He chose image. He chose control. And Jenny? Jenny finally chose herself. For the first time in years, the entire world saw her make a decision without fear. And that terrified Sumit more than anything. If the person you've begged to fight for you doesn't notice when you stop fighting, you were never the one they were fighting for. Let's rewind. Because this didn't happen overnight. Jenny and Sumit had been putting on a performance long before the producers ever showed up. From the outside, it looked like your classic cultural clash, age gap love story, society versus romance trope. But if you were really watching, really listening, the cracks weren't just about their difference in age or where they came from. The real story was hidden in who controlled the narrative. Every time Jenny spoke up about how isolated she felt, Sumit called her dramatic. Every time she asked for privacy, he claimed she was trying to divide him from his family. But the worst part? Jenny started to believe it was her fault, that she was the disruption, that she had to be more agreeable, more quiet, more grateful. She shrunk herself into someone who could survive in a house that was never built for her. Until survival turned into silence. And silence turned into something worse. Numbness. So when she finally walked away, it wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was the quietest rebellion, no press conference, no staged exit. It was a woman who finally realized that nothing was going to change if she didn't make the change herself. She booked that flight without telling the show, without waiting for production approval, without even making a goodbye post. She was done being a storyline. She was done waiting for her voice to matter. She was gone. And if you think that moment was the real shock, wait until you see how Sumit reacted when he realized she was serious this time. Every day inside that house chipped away at her piece by piece, until even her silence started to sound like resistance. Jenny wasn't just tired. She was trapped inside a life where even breathing without permission felt like rebellion. Her clothes? Monitored. Her meals? Criticized. Her schedule? Dismissed. All of it ran through an invisible filter called family rules, enforced by a woman who once said she'd rather die than see Jenny become her daughter-in-law. And now that same woman dictated how Jenny should live, dress, eat, sleep, and speak, while Sumit stood there acting like it was all normal. As if expecting your wife to bow to your mother's every command was love. As if enduring humiliation was compromise. It wasn't the shouting or the insults that broke her down. It was the constant small erasures of who she was. Not being allowed to wear shorts inside her own home. Being side-eyed for watching TV after dark. Having to hide affection with her own husband like they were two strangers in a guest house. That level of micromanagement doesn't come from concern. It comes from control. And every time Jenny tried to bring it up, Sumit hit her with the same line. This is how Indian families are. But the truth? That wasn't culture. That was convenience. Because when the same man, who once said he'd run away with her, now says he's finally happy being back under his mother's rule, something's off. Jenny saw through it. She saw a man who wanted both, the Western love story and the safety net of his traditional comfort zone. And when those two things clashed, he expected Jenny to fold. When a person uses culture as a shield to deflect accountability, they're not preserving tradition, they're hiding from change. Inside that house, Jenny had no room to feel like a wife. She was a tenant, a guest, a problem to be managed quietly. And the worst part? Sumit had started gaslighting her into believing that she was the one creating tension. That if she'd only stop reacting, his mother wouldn't snap. If she'd dress more modestly, no one would complain. If she'd stop asking for privacy, she'd get more respect. That's how control works. It makes you feel like your discomfort is the real issue, not the behavior causing it. Jenny tried. She softened her voice, bit her tongue, wore what they wanted, stayed in her room, said less. And still, she wasn't accepted. That was the moment she realized acceptance was never the goal. They wanted obedience. The pressure built quietly, like steam behind a sealed door. Jenny knew if she didn't speak up now, she'd lose whatever voice she had left. So the next time Sumit dismissed her frustration with a smug smile and called it a small issue, she didn't yell. She didn't cry. She looked him dead in the eye and said, I'm done living like I don't matter. Because when silence becomes your only way to survive, speaking up becomes the most dangerous and necessary act of love for yourself. He kept saying it was tradition, as if that one word could erase the years of chaos, rejection, and betrayal she had already endured to stand beside him. Every time Jenny questioned why she had to follow someone else's schedule, sleep patterns, food preferences, or even wardrobe rules inside her own marriage, Sumit wrapped the answer in a blanket labeled joint family culture. But when you looked closer, it wasn't culture. It was control, dressed in politeness. It was obedience, framed as respect. And it was Sumit playing both sides, always choosing the path of least conflict for himself, while expecting Jenny to carry the emotional cost of every compromise. He never directly said, change yourself for my family. He didn't have to. He let the house speak for him. Let his mother's passive aggression and his father's cold glances say everything out loud while he stayed quiet, like a background actor in the very drama he created. But when the cameras weren't rolling, when Jenny tried to pull him aside and ask for a conversation like two equals in a marriage, he laughed. He brushed her off. He joked about her complaints as if they were quirks, not cries for help. It wasn't just dismissive, it was strategic. Because if he treated her pain as irrational, he never had to take it seriously. And if he didn't take it seriously, he never had to confront the fact that he built a marriage on promises he never intended to keep. When someone laughs at your pain but still wants your loyalty, that's not love. It's emotional bait and switch. Jenny asked for space. Sumit said she was selfish. Jenny asked for privacy. Sumit said she was being dramatic. Jenny asked why they couldn't live alone again like they used to. and suddenly he rewrote the entire past. Now he claimed he always wanted to live with his parents, that it was the plan all along. But where was that energy when he was sneaking around lying to them about her for years? Where was that pride and culture when he begged Jenny not to leave after his mom threatened suicide? The truth is, Sumit only cared about joint family culture once it became a tool to silence the woman who risked everything for him. He didn't want peace between Jenny and his parents. He wanted submission. And instead of admitting that his version of family came with strings, he blamed her for not tying herself to those same expectations. That's not compromise. That's convenience. The man who used to say, "I'll give up anything to be with you," suddenly couldn't even give her a separate kitchen, a locked door, or a safe space to exhale. And still, she stayed. For months, she swallowed the comments, the double standards, the cold stares, the silent dinners. But when Sumit finally told her, flat out, that she needed to adjust more because his mom was finally treating her like a daughter, Jenny broke. Not because she was weak, but because she realized that being accepted in that house came with a condition, erasing who she was. And when love comes with an expiration date on your identity, staying becomes the quietest form of self-abandonment. He talks about that divorce like he gave up oxygen to be with Jenny, like it was a crown of thorns he wore just for her. But let's be honest, Sumit didn't leave a happy marriage for love. He left a loveless, arranged setup that he never wanted in the first place. And even then, it wasn't quick. He dragged Jenny through years of hiding, deception, and emotional burnout before he finally entangled himself from a relationship he never emotionally entered. So, when he now says things like, "I gave up everything for you," it doesn't land as noble. It lands as revisionist history, the kind used to manipulate someone into staying quiet when they're finally ready to ask for something real. He brings up being disowned as if he's a martyr, but the timeline never fully adds up. He was sneaking around with Jenny while living in the same house as his first wife, acting like a teenager in a double life. Jenny didn't force him into that. She didn't ask him to lie, to hide her identity, to blur the lines. That was Sumit's choice. And when the truth finally exploded, it wasn't him stepping up, it was him getting caught. The disowning didn't happen because he defended Jenny, it happened because he got exposed. That's not sacrifice. That's fallout. And yet, he turns that fallout into a tool. Something he brings up every time Jenny tries to say she's not okay. When someone frames their own consequences as proof of loyalty, they're not owning their choices, they're using them to control yours. Jenny was groomed into gratitude. Every time she brought up discomfort, she was reminded of what he lost. The house. The family. The community. But here's what he never mentioned. He still had the comfort of his hometown, the backup plan of his parents, the financial familiarity of life in India. Meanwhile, Jenny left her country, her job, her retirement security, and lived as an immigrant with zero safety net. So, who really sacrificed everything? The one who got to stay in his comfort zone? Or the one who gave up everything familiar for the hope of being loved without strings? He loved Jenny, but only in a version that didn't challenge him. The fun version. The Western woman who stood by him while he rebelled. But the second she asked for respect, not luxury, not power, just basic respect, the story changed. Now she was difficult. Now she was too loud. Now she didn't understand the culture. She understood it just fine. What she didn't understand was why the man who once said "you're my everything" now treated her like an emotional liability in front of his family. The guilt wore her down until even her silence sounded like complicity. But one night, sitting in that cramped room, hearing him recite the same tired script about all he'd given up, Jenny snapped. Not in anger, in clarity. She finally said, I never asked you to lose anything. I asked you to grow up. And in that moment, the guilt stopped working because she finally saw that none of it, not the divorce, not the tears, not the drama, was for her. It was for him, to protect his image, to maintain control. And when that mask slipped, so did her patience. And once someone stops feeling guilty, they start remembering what they deserve. And that's when things start to shift, for real. He didn't expect her to say it out loud. Not like that. Not with that tone. Not with her bags half packed, and her voice so steady, it felt like a punch. Jenny had threatened to leave before, but this time, it wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. And that scared Sumit more than any fight ever had. Because when Jenny finally said, I'll move out with or without you, he heard something he'd never really processed before. She meant it. And what terrified him even more was the possibility that this time, she might not come back. But the moment the adrenaline faded and she looked around the room, reality hit her too. Where would she go? Rent wasn't cheap in India. Not for foreigners. Not for a retired woman without a local job, family connections, or financial backup. She'd spent years trying to make her life with Sumit work. She didn't have a second plan. And no matter how strong her will was, her bank account wasn't going to cooperate. That's what made the whole thing feel like a trap. Jenny had love, but no freedom. She had a husband, but no autonomy. She had a voice, but no leverage. When love locks you in place, but doesn't lift you up, it stops being a home and starts being a cage. Sumit knew exactly where her pressure points were. He never yelled, never threatened. He didn't have to. He'd already set the rules without ever saying them out loud. Jenny couldn't leave because she didn't have the means. He knew she didn't want to go back to the U.S., feeling like a failure. He knew she was exhausted, scared, and stuck in a country where she had no legal rights as a spouse, no job prospects, and no financial independence. But he also knew she had someone who'd take her in if she asked, her daughter. That's where the dilemma turned raw. Her daughter had always supported her, loved her, even showed up on the show to remind viewers that Jenny wasn't some lost old woman in over her head. She was a mother. A woman who had raised someone strong and stable and full of love. And somewhere in Jenny's mind, the question lingered. Why was it easier to ask for help from a daughter than to expect basic care from a husband? She didn't want to run back to the U.S. She didn't want to give her critics the satisfaction. But she also couldn't keep pretending that emotional starvation was better than financial instability. It's the kind of crisis that doesn't come with a clean answer. Do you stay in a marriage that keeps you small? Or do you gamble everything to breathe again? Do you protect your pride or protect your peace? Jenny stared at the floor in silence that night, while Sumit scrolled through his phone like nothing had happened. And that's when she realized he wasn't scared of losing her. He was scared of losing control over the version of her that stayed quiet, stayed grateful, stayed dependent. And suddenly, the money didn't feel like the biggest issue anymore. The real problem wasn't the rent. It was the cost of continuing to shrink herself to fit into his world. And once you realize that being broke is easier than being broken, you stop asking permission to walk away. It started with little things. Questions masked as concern, glances that lingered too long, comments passed like jokes but loaded with judgment. Jenny couldn't even sit down to watch her favorite show without feeling someone's eyes drilling into the back of her neck. What was once called love now felt like surveillance. She wasn't just living with Sumit's family. She was being watched by them, measured by them, quietly graded by a set of rules that shifted daily depending on who was in the room. And Sumit? He never stopped it. He called it normal, told her to ignore it, said they meant well. But the truth was clear. Jenny wasn't a wife in that house. She was a tolerated guest, constantly reminded she didn't belong. Every time she laughed too loudly, someone flinched. Every time she wore something comfortable, someone looked uncomfortable. Every time she relaxed, it was a problem. And the most painful part? Sumit acted like she was imagining it. Like the whispers weren't real. Like the stares weren't meant for her. He never defended her. He just told her to adjust. And slowly, the walls of that house started to close in tighter and tighter. Not with violence, but with silence, with shame, with pressure so quiet it was easy to miss, until you couldn't breathe anymore. When love starts to feel like constant correction, what you're in isn't a relationship. It's a slow erasure of your identity. Jenny noticed how everything she did now needed pre-approval. If she wanted to take a nap, someone would ask why. If she made something simple for lunch, someone would suggest a better way. If she wanted to talk privately with Sumit, it had to be outside, away from the ears of his parents. The kitchen wasn't hers. The bedroom didn't feel like hers. Even her time wasn't hers. She existed under a microscope. Every move dissected by a family that barely tolerated her, and a husband who avoided conflict at all costs, even if it meant throwing her under the bus. It got to the point where Jenny stopped speaking. She started holding her breath around corners, started planning her walks based on when the parents were likely to nap, started dressing up just to sit in the living room, because anything less might spark a whisper she didn't have the energy to hear. That's not a marriage. That's not home. That's survival. And survival wasn't what she signed up for. She didn't leave her country, her life, her peace, to be parented by her partner's mother and treated like a long-term house guest in a place that called itself family. That's when the planning started. Quiet at first. A conversation with her daughter. A look at flights. A mental list of what she'd take and what she'd leave. Not out of spite. Not out of anger. Out of exhaustion. Out of the need to feel like a person again. Because the saddest thing wasn't that Jenny was planning to leave. It was that no one in that house noticed she had already left emotionally. And when you're more comfortable walking on eggshells than walking barefoot in your own home, it's already over. It's just a matter of when you admit it. She didn't raise her voice, and that's what made it hit harder. No screaming, no accusations, no dramatic exit. Jenny looked Sumit in the eye and said one sentence that cut deeper than any fight they'd ever had. I don't feel like a person anymore. And for a moment, there was silence. You'd think after everything they'd been through, the years of visa chaos, lies, heartbreak, and humiliation, Sumit would pause and listen. But instead, he chuckled. Said she was being sensitive. Said it wasn't that bad. Said other people had it worse. That laugh, sharp, casual, dismissive, landed like a slap. It wasn't funny. It was the final confirmation that her pain had never been taken seriously. Jenny didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She just nodded and walked out of the room, slow and steady like a person who had already made up her mind. She didn't pack in a panic. She folded each piece of clothing like she was untangling herself from the years of hoping he'd get it. Each shirt into the suitcase felt like another broken expectation finally let go. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. You could see it on her face. The numbness had lifted, and what replaced it wasn't anger. It was clarity. She was done asking to be seen, done begging to be heard, done shrinking herself to avoid conflict. And the moment Sumit heard the zipper on her bag close, it was the first time he stopped smiling. When a woman stops arguing, she's not overreacting. She's already gone. You're just now catching up to the silence. He followed her, trying to soften the moment, tossing out half apologies and what-if scenarios. But they weren't real. He wasn't fighting for her. He was fighting for the comfort of not being the one left. There's a difference. Jenny had always been the one to back down, to compromise, to smooth it over. This time, she didn't. She kept packing while he talked. That was the shift. She no longer needed him to get it. She needed out. And for the first time, she wasn't trying to explain why. Because nothing she said would change a man who had ignored every previous cry for help. It's not that Sumit didn't love her. It's that he loved the version of her that made his life easier. The one who would fold her values for the sake of the family. The one who would trade freedom for affection. But Jenny finally understood that love without respect is a performance. And she was done performing. She didn't slam the door. She didn't announce it to his parents. She didn't call the producers for a dramatic scene. She just finished packing, sat down, and started scrolling flights on her phone, like someone booking a long overdue appointment with herself. And when your peace becomes more valuable than your history, you don't need to scream to walk away. You just need to stop waiting for someone to notice you're drowning. She didn't post about it. Didn't tell the cameras. Didn't sit Sumit down for a final heart-to-heart. She just booked the flight. Quietly. Decisively. Not to punish. Not to get attention. Because she had nothing left to prove. This wasn't revenge. It was survival. Jenny wasn't running from him. She was running back to herself. And this time, she didn't need anyone's permission to leave. She packed what mattered. Left behind what didn't. No grand speeches. No dramatic music. Just a woman who had spent years waiting for someone to choose her. Finally choosing herself. The taxi came early. She didn't wake him. She didn't need to. The noise of her absence would say everything louder than her words ever could. She sat in the back seat, staring out the window. The streetlights blinking past like quiet witnesses to her escape. It wasn't bitterness on her face. It was relief. When leaving no longer feels like loss, that's how you know you stayed too long. The first missed call came as she passed through airport security. Then another. Then messages. He wasn't used to silence. Jenny had always responded, always explained, always come back. This time, she didn't. Not because she wanted to hurt him, but because she was done translating her pain into something he could understand. Her voice had been ignored for too long. Let the silence speak now. On the plane, she didn't cry. Not the way she thought she would. She felt empty, sure, but in a clean way, like a closet finally cleared. Like space being made for something new. She looked around at the strangers beside her and thought, none of these people know who I am. And that felt good. It felt safe. It felt like a reset. Because for the first time in a decade, she wasn't being watched, judged, measured. She was just Jenny. Not the foreign wife. Not the mistake. Not the scandal. Just a woman on a plane, going home. Meanwhile, back in India, Sumit was pacing, calling her phone like it would undo what he'd ignored for months. The same man who had told her she was overreacting was now reacting to a reality he never expected. She didn't need his validation anymore. He tried calling her daughter. No answer. He checked her social media. Nothing. Not a hint. Not a clue. Just absence. And for a man who had always controlled the emotional temperature of their relationship, that silence hit like a tidal wave. He wasn't in charge anymore. He wasn't the center. He was alone. Jenny landed in America to a tight hug, a quiet room, and a moment of stillness that felt like medicine. No cameras, no lectures, no one asking her to change, just space to breathe. She didn't make a post. She didn't go live. She didn't explain. She reclaimed. And when the person who once begged for space finally finds it, they're not looking back to see who noticed. They're looking forward to see who never needed convincing. She walked onto that stage with a calm that made everyone lean forward. No drama in her stride, no tears threatening to fall, just presence. A woman who had nothing to hide and even less to prove. Jenny sat down, adjusted her mic, and folded her hands. The silence between her and the host already thick with unspoken truths. The producers didn't even try to overhype it. They didn't need to. Everyone in the studio knew this was going to hit different. Because this wasn't the same Jenny from seasons past. This wasn't the pleading partner hoping to be heard. This was someone who had been through fire, burned quietly, and walked out without asking for sympathy. And then his face appeared on the screen. Sumit, live from India, looking smaller than usual, visibly rattled, eyes darting between the screen and the silence. It took 2 seconds for the energy to shift. He smiled nervously. Jenny didn't. She looked directly into the lens, didn't blink, didn't wave. That screen had once been the space where their long-distance love played out, where promises were whispered and plans were made. Now, it was a wall. And Sumit was on the other side, unsure how to climb back over. The host tried to break the ice, asking how it felt to see each other. Jenny paused, let the silence sit, then simply said, "It's different now." The words were basic. The delivery wasn't. The audience got it. So did Sumit. He chuckled awkwardly, trying to bring in that old charm, but Jenny didn't play along. This wasn't banter. This was accountability. And for the first time, he wasn't in control of the tone. She was. When silence holds more truth than words ever could, you know the balance has shifted. Sumit tried to explain, to walk back months of minimization, deflection, and passive neglect. But it was too late. Jenny wasn't arguing. She wasn't debating. She let him speak, didn't interrupt, and that's what made it so devastating. Because he wasn't talking to her anymore, he was talking to a memory. The version of Jenny that used to cry, explain, wait, hope. She wasn't on that stage. The woman sitting there now had moved on emotionally, and nothing he said could pull her back into a place of doubt. Even the other cast members noticed. Their eyes moved between the screen and Jenny, realizing what was happening in real time. This wasn't about whether they would stay together. This was about how long Sumit could keep pretending nothing had changed. He talked about cultural pressure. She said nothing. He said he missed her. She raised an eyebrow. He said they could work it out. She didn't nod. Didn't soften. And it wasn't cruel. It was clarity. Jenny had finally seen the difference between love and loyalty, between staying and surviving. She didn't need the room to agree with her. She didn't need the audience to cheer. She had her piece, and she wasn't trading it again. Not for applause, not for approval, and definitely not for a man who only noticed her pain when it became inconvenient. And when a woman reclaims her voice by choosing silence, the loudest thing in the room is the absence of her fear. She didn't give an ultimatum, didn't issue one last emotional plea, no tearful demands, no dramatic standoffs. Jenny simply stood up when the camera stopped rolling, took a breath that didn't need permission, and walked off that tell-all stage like someone who knew exactly who she was without needing anyone to validate it. There was no script left for Sumit to hide behind, no parents to defer to, no production crew to shape the moment, just the weight of one simple truth. The woman who waited for him to grow up was done waiting. And now, if he didn't follow, he'd be watching her life happen from a distance. Again, but this time, she wouldn't be waving from the screen. She'd be gone. Sumit sat there, still connected to the Zoom feed, face tight, expression unreadable. Maybe he thought she was bluffing. Maybe he believed this was just another emotional wave to ride out like all the others. But Jenny wasn't bluffing. And this wasn't temporary. This wasn't about another fight or another cultural clash. This was about time. Wasted time. 10 years of it. And she wasn't going to waste one more second living a version of love where she had to justify her own dignity. You can forgive someone for wasting your money, but not for wasting your time, because you don't get that back. His family never had to lift a finger. They never had to scream or block the wedding. All they had to do was wait him out, knowing that if they stayed cold and silent long enough, Sumit would fold. And he did. Over and over. Always choosing the path of least resistance. Always calling it balance. But balance doesn't exist when one person keeps sacrificing and the other keeps benefiting. Jenny gave up everything to be part of his world. He couldn't even give her a private kitchen, a space to breathe, a seat at the table without conditions. Now, the decision was his. For real this time. No rehearsals, no loopholes. Either he steps into the life she built without him and proves he can carry the weight of a real partnership, or he stays where he's comfortable and watches the woman he said he loved stop answering his calls for good. Jenny wasn't angry. She didn't slam a door. She didn't leave a note. She simply chose herself. That was the loudest act of all, the one she should have made years ago. And Sumit? He still had time, but not much. Because when a woman outgrows the version of love that kept her small, she doesn't go looking for replacements. She reclaims her peace, her pace, her place in the world. And when the person you thought would always stay finally walks away without looking back, you don't chase them with words. You chase them with change.